I've heard you say that like one of the biggest things that people struggle with that consume your content is they feel like they're lacking control in their life. What do you think they're lacking control of?
Well, this has multiple levels. I think we are in a pandemic of loneliness. And that is the top part of Maslow, like the social belonging, confidence, and all of that leads to an increase in the next level, which is our self-confidence, our personal discipline, which leads to a failure in the top part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like this self-actualization. Can I accomplish the crap that I want to accomplish this year?
And what do you think people can do if they're feeling lonely, out of control, they don't know what their future is going to hold? Like, what's the first step, that somebody can take to kind of get themselves out of that rut?
One of the first is realizing that all of this social media and stuff is a placebo of relationships, and it doesn't actually fulfill your primal need for belonging and connection with people. And the second part is develop just we have you heard of locus of control?
I haven't.
So a person with an internal locus of control says, I decide what happens in my life. I'm in charge of the outcomes. It's my fault if something goes wrong. And an external locus of control is kind of like the world happens to me. So like my control center is all out there. So obviously people who are successful have that internal locus of control, and they're in charge. But there's also an internal locus of self-esteem. So where does my self-esteem come from? Does it come from in here or comments on social media or something like that? And I see your YouTube plaque back there. I've got a bunch of those here. And like if I allowed those really positive comments, and that's my source of esteem, that's the same exact window that opens for the negative comments to come in and just make me feel like. So that means I have an external locus of self-esteem. If your self-esteem is internally derived, then there's nothing external that can really happen. So that would be number one, is I'm going to start doing everything I can to not allow this positive things out here to influence how I feel about me, and all the negative things can't influence me either. So that is an internal self-esteem locus. So step two is developing that sense of personal discipline. And we can dig into that if you want to do that. And there are some proven ways to absolutely do that, and that ways that nobody's talking about.
Yeah, I would love to get into like how you can kind of hack your brain to become more disciplined. But first, like following up on what you just said, I think it's so true. However, I think it's much easier said than done, because I do think that in many ways, like external validation and praise can be a great metric for how you're doing in life. Like, I see the views and subscribers and stuff on YouTube, and it's like, okay, I'm on the right track. However, if I let that be the basis of how I feel about myself, it can be a very slippery slope. So how can people develop a better relationship with external validation and not be, how can people develop a better relationship with the external and feel good about themselves without focusing on that?
Yeah. So it starts with one thing, and that is, when I see positive or negative information, does that help me act or feel? So it should be acting. So I should act a different way because I'm using these YouTube comments or YouTube metrics. Is it influencing how I feel about me? Is it changing my self-worth? And if I receive love, if I need love from strangers, that means my door is open to hate as well. And these are absolute strangers who should never dictate a single ounce of your self-esteem or how you feel about yourself. So feeling great about it, and you can feel good, but it dictating your self-worth is absolutely toxic. And it's pretty easy to start just kind of getting that into your mind on a regular basis. When I'm reading the comments, I'm reading, messages on social media. If I allow that to change my self-esteem, something is wrong. But it should be, I don't know this person. I wouldn't invite them into my house at this point. They also shouldn't be invited into my head. So if you wouldn't allow them in your around your kids, hanging around your house, they don't belong in your head either.
Well, and I think the thing that takes over is this dopamine trap, right? I know you talk a lot about dopamine and how the most successful people in the world, they like know how to harness their dopamine, not let it get out of control. Like talk more about what you mean by that and what are some things people can do to have a really healthy relationship with dopamine?
Your source of dopamine, your number one source of dopamine should be you, not your kids, not your wife, not your family. It should be you and your actions. And we'll get into that in the discipline part. But what most people don't do, like if you just get like a simple journal, so like if you just get like a blank page in your journal and you kind of draw out, it looks like a basketball court. So I'm going to do a circle in the middle here. And then I'm going to write down all the places in my life I get dopamines. And I'm going to be honest. I'm going to put Instagram comments, alcohol, or drugs, or pornography, or, all these places that people are getting dopamine from. I'm going to write that down. And then what I do with all of my clients is on a 1 to 100, or you have 100 points, and you have to spend all 100 points, but you have to put a point value on where you're getting your dopamine from. So, and that's typically the first time ever in somebody's life where they've actually mapped out where their pleasure is coming from, not happiness. Dopamine is not happiness. Dopamine is pleasure. And most people confuse the difference between those two. So if I have a score of 10 for throwing the ball for my dogs or playing with my kids or things that that should be higher, and the score for alcohol is like 65, you've never, like, once people see that metric, it is very, very hard to ignore. So the step 2 is like, where should the dopamine be? So here's where it is now. I'm going to draw a little map, and on the next sheet of paper, we're going to draw a new map and start, drawing an arrow from the negative to the positive. Like I'm going to borrow dopamine from this location. Maybe you don't have to quit all the way. I'm just going to borrow some points, so at least these two are equal. And that's the next step. I'm going to get this from a 12 on this, and this one's like a 50. I'm going to find out the midpoint of that and borrow dopamine from the high dopamine area. Does that make sense?
Totally. And what have you found to be the most like effective things for having a healthy dopamine score? Like what are the things that people can do for themselves that keep their dopamine at the most healthy level?
Well, that goes straight into the discipline thing if you're ready to talk about it.
Yep.
So when I said that like your number one source of dopamine needs to be yourself, there are a few things you can do. The number one thing when we talk about discipline, the definition of discipline is that no one talks about your ability to prioritize the needs of your future self ahead of your own. And that's all it is. Can I prioritize future me above my present self? So over time, I'm going to try to do things on a repetitive basis as often as possible to where future me is getting some kind of reward. I might set up the coffee maker the night before. I might put clothes out for myself. I might just put a thing on my phone that reminds me in certain times. And this is short term, right? So these are small little things. It's springtime right now as you and I are recording this, or spring has just started. And I might go into my winter jackets that we're about to take out of this closet and kind of put it down in the basement for a while and put $100 bill in one of those and maybe write a note to myself on there. So the more actions I can take to set up my future self for success, the more, once that success comes, I'm looking backwards to my past tense self, not with regret, but with gratitude. That's the most important shift to make. And I'm going to continuously do this. I'm essentially acting like a butler, except I'm doing it for myself. I am the butler of my future self. And this isn't just like folding clothes and setting up coffee. This is how we spend money. The food that we're eating, the stuff we're buying at a grocery store is all going to dictate, am I prioritizing me now or me later? And a lot of people never really have this conversation of where are my priorities? And they're typically, when people are not really getting the results they want out of life, their priorities are now, here and now, and maybe a little bit in the future, but they're not really prioritizing all the things that are happening in the line. So what happens is my daily interactions I'm looking backwards, or I'm anticipating stuff that my past tense self has set up for me. So I've got dopamine coming in, anticipation and drive to start setting my future self up. And I'm getting dopamine to get stuff from my past tense self. So I'm getting dopamine from both directions of versions of me. And that is the most powerful way that we can start doing that. And just the way to do this, there's not like, here's 17 super cool tricks to do this or some formula. You just do it as much as you can, and you rate yourself every single day. How did I do? Where were my priorities today? And it takes 10 seconds to put it in a notebook or journal, calendar, whatever. And you put it down. And just the act of rating yourself and bringing it into your conscious awareness is the fastest way to get that process into your life. Because it's the same thing like when you buy a new car and you start seeing it all over the place. I'm just repetitively exposing myself to that level of awareness. And you don't need to change anything. Your mammalian part of your brain is going to do that for you.
And what have you found to be the most like common things that people need to reprioritize in their lives as far as like working on their future self?
The most common is probably time management and environment management. Like if you're thinking that you're going to be a multimillionaire or you want to run a company or something like that, and you can't organize your office or your desk, and you can't keep your area clean, like you can't even pick up after yourself. Every time that you go out and you want to look like a CEO, you want to look like a leader, you're going to know there's a part of your brain dedicated to knowing that you're faking it. And that's where we have incongruent behavior. And that's how we make these gut feelings in other people. We have this conversation. Everything looks great. We follow that LinkedIn article that we read of 14 ways to look more confident and command respect like a leader. And that person kind of gets a gut feeling. And the gut feeling is like something's not right. Something's not adding up. So no matter what we do, we're sending off these small signals. So environment, time, appearance. And appearance is like my hygiene, all of that stuff that might signal that I'm an authority to other people. So environment, time, appearance, social skills. And social is one of the ways that we should be getting dopamine and we're not. We're getting it from social media instead of my closer circle of friends, my next door neighbors that live next to my house, the people that live across the street, the people in 3D are where most of your social dopamine should come from 3D human beings and not 2D human beings, people that you know. And financial is the last one.
So I was somebody that was incarcerated on felony drug charges. I share that because one of the hardest things I had to do was completely change my identity and transform into this new version of myself. And I think it's so challenging for people because, for me, I was so used to being a failure. My brain was convinced that I was going to fail at life because before I was in jail, I failed at everything. And so how can people like quickly or efficiently kind of trick their brain into becoming that new version of themselves when the old version of themselves has been beaten down over and over and over again?
There's a couple of things, and that always comes down to confidence. If I have a lot of self-doubt, that's going to be a big one. But even bigger than self-doubt is shame and self-judgment. And, most judgment is us kind of casting that off onto other people. So the fastest way, and there's no hack for this, but the fastest way to do this is to become so self-forgiving that people would think that you're crazy, like you're bat crazy because you're so forgiving of yourself. Because shame and the fear of shame is what holds people back from really doing that stuff. And when it comes to confidence, there's two main elements of confidence. And that number one is radical self-forgiveness. Like who gives a crap what happened in the past? Just radical to the point where it's insane. Because if you're feeling down, you're in the dumps, like you're doubting yourself all the time, that's already delusional. You're already delusional. So just pick delusions in the other direction and be more delusionally self-forgiving. The part two of that confidence is a generalized, it does not need to be specific, but a very generalized expectation that things are going to be okay. And just those two things, you will drastically just shed so much weight that you notice like so many people carry this stuff around, like shame about some thing that happened like when they were 20 or when they were in high school. If you get to the point of radical forgiveness for other people and for yourself, you get to a point of, I have confidence. But I would say the third part is stop waiting for permission, because a lot of people are waiting for some signal. Once my bank account reaches this much, once people respect me and I can prove that to myself, they'll just wait on these little milestones. And those milestones act as little permission slips for us to feel confident. And they're completely artificial. They're absolutely placebos. They don't do anything to make you more confident. It's just a placebo. So there is no one coming to give you permission. You've just got to give it to yourself.
And speaking of being radical and confident, I think one of the tough things, and again, this is just speaking from my own experience and people I've talked to, is like when you're kind of on the come up and your life isn't where it wants to be, you have this kind of cognitive dissonance going on that's like, well, my finances aren't where they are, my relationships aren't, my health isn't, but I'm on the journey up. And it's like, how do I become confident even though my circumstances are crap? Like, how can people become like delusionally confident when they're out trying to make it, introducing themselves to other people, even though their life at home isn't where it wants to be?
Yeah. And that goes back to, do I manage my environment, my time, appearance, social, financial? And if those things are on the up, like you're actually taking care of yourself, you're living life how you really want to live it, but it doesn't matter what the metrics are. If you're doing the right things and you're living off camera, so not your results, but your behavior when you're off camera will dictate how people feel about you. So if you try to act confident and you're feeling insecure about all of this stuff because you haven't made your bed, you didn't get up early, you don't have a lot of discipline, but you're trying to give this appearance of confidence or discipline out in public, you've got to start living that way off camera. So it's just a natural thing. And most people view confidence as something that you do, like it's a thing that I do. And all it is removal of things. It's not adding in anything. So the biggest lesson I ever learned in my lifetime, training operatives and stuff, is that confidence is not additive. Like, I don't need to add things to you to get you to be confident. I need you to remove this fear of social judgment. This is why public speaking is the number one fear. And second, I really need you to remove this self-shame and all this crap that you're carrying for no reason. It doesn't make you a better person at all. It doesn't make you a better person to feel ashamed of stuff. It makes you a worse person. It makes you less effective, and it makes you more judgmental of other people. And the final element of this is composure. And when most people go out and try to be confident, they're either in posturing mode or collapse mode. So in posturing mode, someone's like puff their chest out, they speak louder than they normally would, and they try to overdo confidence. And then the collapse mode is, I'm going to shrink so other people feel more comfortable around me. But I think the middle of that is just composure is the word I would have for that. So just make composure like this daily practice. And composure is the fastest route when it comes to practicing things. Composure is the fastest route to confidence.
Yeah, the puffing the chest out, it's kind of like the invisible lat syndrome. You familiar with that, where guys will like walk around like this just to give the impression that they're bigger than they actually are as far as their upper body. You talked about composure, which I think it gets into like, how can you be more comfortable in difficult situations? What have you found to be like a hack or something that you've worked on yourself or with the people that you've trained to help people practice becoming more composed, during difficult situations?
So there's a few things, and first we have to understand like the neuroscience of this and why that works. And we have this mammalian part of our brain, this limbic system that kind of governs 99% of our life. So we think that we're in charge, and this animal brain is actually in charge. And most people need to realize that part of our brain doesn't speak English. It can't read affirmations at all. Like, there's no language ability in that part of our brain. So when it comes to coming into life and trying to get more composure in conversations and having that that level of discipline where you're kind of a lot more in charge. You're not in charge of the room, you're in charge of yourself. Mistake number one that destroys 90% of people, the biggest mistake, and I've never heard anybody else say this, is thinking in terms of hierarchy and status. So am I above or below this other person? And the first step to that is, am I willing to agree to treat everyone equally? This means that if I meet Jeff Bezos tomorrow, I'm going to treat him the exact same way as I treat a Starbucks barista. Everybody gets the same. There's no hierarchy. I'm going to be the same to every person that I talk to. And that level of consistency sets the stage for that level of composure. So to going into that mammalian part of this, it's a practice. So composure is a lifelong practice, but you get good at it by making your body get involved first. So our brains are hardwired to kind of compare with other animals and stuff. So with other humans. And the moment you get in a conversation, the way that you should permanently change the way you compare yourself is slowness and movement. And am I willing to be the slowest person in the room? And am I willing to be more relaxed than the other person? That's it. Those are the only things. It doesn't matter if it's this multi-million-dollar potential client on a sales call or the barista at Starbucks. They're going to be identical. I'm going to be slower than the other person, more relaxed, treat everybody the same. And that is the fastest way to do that. And then kind of rating yourself at the end of the day. How did I do on a 1 to 10 on composure? Was I more in collapse? Did I lean into the posturing side? And definitely, absolutely, rating yourself every day is going to bring more and more awareness. And of course, it's kitschy and it's something that's all over the internet, but mindfulness, this practice of mindfulness throughout the day, just because it's all over the damn place, there's a reason for that. It doesn't mean we should dismiss it. It's absolutely powerful, especially when it comes to composure and leadership and authority.
What have you found to be the number one thing that people struggle with as far as being uncomfortable?
You mean in social settings?
Yeah, like what's the biggest thing that you find people to be uncomfortable with?
I think it is a fear of future judgment. So it's imagining some kind of social judgment. And we're tribal animals. And if a large number of people in our tribe 1 million years ago started judging us and making fun of us, we could be outcast. We're not going to have sex. We're not going to have babies. And then our genes die. And this is one of the reasons public speaking is the number one fear. We're not afraid of speaking in public. We're afraid of the potential for judgment. And that's a two-part thing. So the moment I am thinking about the potential for judgment, my brain automatically defaults to saying, if there's a potential for judgment, that also means that I need to manage how I am perceived. So this leads to, there's a potential fear of judgment. I'm going to change how I'm acting to where everything's good. I'm going to manage everything a lot more, which makes us less us, which sends off a little vibe to people that's like something's not right. There's something not really fully adding up. And then we see more skeptical facial expressions or more doubting. So it changes who we are. It makes us more self-managing and more self-managing. So we get out of that need, like judgment's not going to hurt me. Your brain is wired to equate the fear of judgment with the same as being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. So the fastest way to get your brain to understand this is the phrase, there are no tigers. And it's going to remind you that this is a mammalian response system that is outdated. And a lot of our society has kind of outpaced our brain's ability to adapt to it. So just kind of that reminder, there are no tigers. And the second is start like a daily practice of worrying less and less about perception management, because people are looking a lot less than you think. Everybody's thinking, what are they seeing? How are they judging me? They probably don't care. And it's not going to matter. It will never matter at the end of the day.
Do you think there are things that people can do that like force them like naturally to embrace discomfort? I mean, I know one of the things that's helped me is like the cold plunge, sauna, like doing like intense workouts. Like, there's a big trend for that now, and they're linking it to getting better at managing stress and being better in social settings. Like, have you found anything like that to be instrumental?
Yeah, those are proven to work. I mean, the first study on it managing mental health stress was like 1951. They were studying dudes in like Norway and Sweden where there's like saunas everywhere, and why they were so emotionally resilient to stress. And they were measuring it in combat and soldiers returning from combat, and how the saunas and cold water helped manage stress. And those are fantastic. Another one to add on to that is just getting into a practice of yoga, which a lot of people don't associate with that. But if you have a good yoga instructor, they're going to walk you through this little yoga session, and they're going to remind you, like when you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, they're going to tell you to smile. They're going to tell you to breathe slower and smile through that whole process. And it is fantastic at helping somebody manage just I'm mindful, I'm in the moment, I'm continuing to breathe through discomfort, and your brain starts learning these habits. So that is definitely, Doug, you hit it on the head right there.
I think that one of the things that people are really, I think one of the things that people really struggle with is fear. And fear like really like can trap them from making a decision. Fear can trap them from going out and changing their life, and it can just be completely overwhelming. I know we've kind of touched on, some of this stuff already, but like if somebody came to you and they're like, hey, like Chase, like I want the bulletproof way to crush fear so that it doesn't like overpower me and prevent me from like living my best life. Like, what can they do?
Well, the first way is to start identifying all of those fears, because every fear is like, I don't want to go out in public. I'm scared of going in public. Well, why? I have a fear of judgment. And then we go, why is that? And why is that? And you kind of get back to like, well, in middle school, I got made fun of, or in high school, this thing happened. And starting to get aware, the awareness is the fastest way to start getting some of these things unwired. And living in a way where you know that this is kind of a simulation, and you're kind of gamifying your own life by taking these notes every day. We're living in a way that I'm kind of in a video game, and I want to level up my character. I'm going to live in a way that is as fearless as possible. So to get out of those fears, the fastest way to do that is to really, really dig down on each one of those and figure out what it was. I have a system. Actually, if you do PDFs or show notes, I'll just send you the PDF and you can stick it in the description below the video, that all of our intelligence operators go through to assess their level of authority and what's really holding them back in their life. And it's free. It's called the Authority Assessment Inventory. And that's one of the fastest ways. And if you think, even if you're not religious, if there's any belief in your mind that says all of these ancient texts might contain some stuff that's really powerful and some really good wisdom, whether it's the teachings of Judaism or Christianity, or reading Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, and I mispronounced that. I have no doubt I mispronounced that. But all of these texts have these things in common. And even just zooming in on one of those, like the Bible, the most common phrase in the entire Bible is "do not fear." It's the most recurring phrase in the entire Bible. It's 365 times reminding you not to be afraid of anything. It's not a big deal. Nothing is a big deal. And it's every single ancient text that seems to reflect that there's some truth with a lowercase t in all of these. And there may not be one absolute truth, but I think that even Plato, before Christianity was even around, Plato wrote about this and wrote about the folly and waking up from kind of the simulation and realizing that it kind of is a game. With Plato's allegory of the cave, wrote about this a long time ago, way before Christianity was around. But no matter what book you look at, if it's an ancient text and this ancient wisdom, every single thing that you see is telling us that we're all kind of like one thing. Don't be scared of anything in your life, and just kind of go forward and don't be a douchebag. We're all one thing. and don't be scared. That's kind of the main theme of all these books. And I think just starting to live your life that way is such a powerful move. And how can I be less fearful?
And having these people do this quiz to like figure out like what really holds them back, what have you found to be like the common thread of what typically holds people back from, feeling confident, having authority, etc.?
It's going to be a deep answer. It's not like, oh, it's forgetting a Post-it note on your window or something, but it falls back to three things. And all three of those things are patterns that we develop in childhood. And if we can identify what those patterns are and how we kind of unconsciously stuffed them in this backpack and then carried them into adulthood without us really acknowledging it, without our awareness, then we have so much more control over our life. And those three things, if you imagine a triangle, and we call this the childhood development triangle, and I can send it to you if you want to like overlay it right now or put it down where people can grab it. It's what did I do around the age of 8 to earn and keep friends, to feel safe, and to earn rewards from somebody. And the rewards are different. For some kids, it was like food because they had a rough life. And for other kids, it may have been praise for playing the violin really well. But what did I do for friends, safety, and rewards? And how did I avoid things to feel safe, to get friends, to get rewards? What did I avoid? And whatever those responses are for 99% of people, those are the ways that we handle conflict as an adult. Those become the kind of fear of stepping out that we have as an adult because it's a fear of loss. I'm going to lose friends. I'm going to lose safety. I'm going to lose rewards. Those three things. And they start when we're like 8 or 9 years old. And just kind of going back, and this quiz is going to help everybody that's listening right now with this. I can start seeing this pattern. Like I'm a 44-year-old man now. I could take this quiz right now and be like, oh, this started in middle school. I'm still doing this one little thing from middle school, and just kind of dragging that file out of the cabinet and putting it out in the open gives me a lot more control over it because I'm conscious of these patterns. So now they become a choice of like, do I want to continue this or not? Before, we don't have a choice because we never opened that closet and never looked inside and pulled those files out.
This episode is brought to you by Timeline Nutrition. Listen, my main goals for the remainder of the year revolve around health and vitality. After hearing about Timeline Nutrition from several of my friends in the health industry, I decided to give their flagship product, MitoPure, a try. MitoPure contains urolithin A, which is a powerful postbiotic that can be challenging to get from your diet. As you know, science has been a big focus on the podcast, so I was really impressed that Timeline has done 10 years of research to bring this product to market. I've been taking their berry powder for over a month now, and have already noticed a bit of a difference in the gym. Some of the long-term benefits I'm hoping to achieve from taking it include improved energy, muscle strength, and endurance, which are right in line with my goals. So I highly recommend you check out Timeline Nutrition, and they are now offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. So just go to timeline.com/Doug to get 10% off your first order of MitoPure. That's TIMELINE.com/Doug. Now back to the show. I've heard you give your thoughts on like cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, have you found that any other therapies to be like effective at like kind of revamping the mind?
I'm not a therapy expert, but as far as I understand now, the average therapy session for extreme anxiety, stress, PTSD, all of those kind of things to kind of get through that is like 6 to 9 years. And it's the same thing that's accomplished in 4 hours of psilocybin mushrooms. The same results, like 9 years of therapy in a short little package. There are some therapies. Hypnosis has been proven to work with a lot of people, and it kind of has like about a 70 to 80% success rate. Cognitive behavioral therapy has a high success rate over time. So if you keep at it and keep doing it for several years, it will work. Psychedelics work higher than 90%, and that's in like 4 hours. It's in one session. So that's the fastest route to do it. Working with a coach, if you can, like if you have a coach that's really digging through and walking you through a lot of this stuff and unpacking your own to yourself is the biggest thing. Because if you're just sitting there filling out a little workbook along with a book that you got on Amazon or something like that, it's going to be full of BS because we're very deceptive to ourselves. I mean, I'm an expert in this stuff. I saw a therapist probably 6 years ago, and I was full of it until I really unpacked a lot of this stuff. So I'm not immune to any of this. But that's the fastest way to do it, is to get a coach. Hypnosis, psychedelics, and cognitive behavioral therapy are really powerful for that.
What have you found to be the relationship between like dopamine and motivation? Because I think a lot of this comes down to people just don't feel motivated to change their life.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the dopamine map. It's like where the dopamine is coming from is a big deal. And they may not be setting the right goals, and the motivation might not be there. And here's the thing that nobody's going to say. You're going to see all these mindset coaches, therapists. You're going to see people saying you need to think differently. You need to set different goals. You need to wake up earlier in the morning, brush your teeth with your opposite hand, all of this little pieces of advice. And people try this for 11, 12, 15 years, and they're not really getting better. And finally, they go see somebody that tests their vitamin levels, that tests their neurotransmitter levels, and they discover, oh, I've just had a vitamin D deficiency this whole frickin' time. They were trying to like think their way out of a vitamin deficiency or a neurotransmitter problem, and they had a physiological problem, not a psychological problem. So that is a big, powerful thing. A doctor can order those tests, and man, vitamin B, vitamin D deficiencies can severely impact your life. And then you're going to, everybody you see is going to say, oh, well, you need to think more positive. You need to think differently. You might have a hormonal neurotransmitter or vitamin imbalance that's just ruining your life. The good news, if that's true, is it's a very, very easy solution. 99% of the time.
Well, but I think like from the action perspective and behavior perspective, I think there needs to be a strong focus, in my opinion, on like small wins for people when they're looking to change their life. Because what happens is we live in this world of instant gratification where we want to achieve these big things in, an hour, when really it's just compounding small wins to achieve that big thing. I would love to hear your perspective on it as far as behavior. Like, what is the importance of just doing the right thing every day and having that lead up to something major?
Yeah. And I think all the old coaches back in the day would call this right action. Am I doing the right action? And that's the same with so many people now get upset and they kind of get into a little emotional rut because they're so used to things being quick. They're kind of thinking, I want the Ozempic version of discipline. Give me the Ozempic so I can do X. And not everything has that. And some things just take time. And those small wins are so critically important. But what's more important is my human brain is not fully in charge of all of this. It's that mammal. So always think of how would Caesar Milan handle this? So if I have a problem with a dog's motivation, I need 4 things to lead a mammalian brain, whether it's a human mammalian brain, a dolphin, or a dog. It's focus. Where is all my focus going? What are the sources of authority? And then tribe and emotion. Focus, authority, tribe, emotion. It spells out fate, and it is your fate for sure. So just figuring that stuff out. So how can I change the mammalian focus? So if I have affirmations on my wall, or I have a calendar that has X's on it every time I work out or every time I get into ketosis or whatever somebody's trying to do, your dog doesn't understand that. That's the big piece that everybody seems to be missing. A dog can't see that. Your mammalian brain isn't excited about a black and white thing on the wall with a bunch of X's on it, unless you have this tremendous emotional attachment to it. So that's where like these vision boards come in, who we're hanging out with, who we're spending time with, why that tribe is so critically important. And all of these elements of our life, like how could I show my goals to my dog? How would I make my dog happy that they're doing the right thing? And do those things for yourself. I'm going to go on a run, and then I'm going to celebrate with something. If I'm setting goals, I'm going to put thousands of pictures associated with each goal so that I can see images so that the mammalian brain starts to understand the direction. So it's not human going this direction and mammalian brain doesn't know the human wants to go this direction. So getting that mammalian brain on board is so critically important.
So say I hired you and I said, you know what, like Chase, like I have been struggling with discipline, procrastination for years, and I just can't seem to figure it out. I got my dopamine chart here, and it's like I'm doing all the wrong habits. How can I quickly like start to unlearn some of these bad habits and then be able to build discipline and stay consistent even when I don't feel like it?
So one of the biggest mistakes that I see clients making. So if you're my client here and I'm talking to you and this is our thing here, there was a mistake in your language that I hear from so many people. If you don't mind me calling you out.
Of course.
You said discipline to do all of these things that I don't want to do. A lot of people see people eating healthy and going to the gym, maybe eating a keto diet or something like that. And they're doing these things all the time. Maybe they're writing a book and they're disciplined about writing the book. But our mind says, I wish I had that level of discipline. Or we internally think they're so disciplined about that. Nothing of what you're seeing is discipline. That guy who goes to the gym every day, none of that is discipline. It's routine. The discipline was there when the habit was started only. So it's very important that we understand discipline's a finite resource. So let's start one habit at a time. So we're setting habits instead of goals. And the discipline is we only need like a little shot glass full of discipline to kick off a habit. And most people have these 19 goals, like they're sitting there eating hot dogs every day and they're surfing social media for 18 hours a day. They have this really horrible lifestyle. And they're like, you know what? In 6 weeks, I'm going to be muscular, fit, thin, successful, rich, good looking, and have extremely white teeth. So you need try to do one discipline habit formation at a time. And the fastest discipline thing that kind of sprouts to rewards in every other area of life is I'm going to use this little shot glass of discipline to start forming a habit of taking care of my future self. If I can do that, if that becomes a habit, everything benefits. Every single aspect of my life starts changing because I'm using my discipline to force this one thing into a habit for I think it's 64 days it takes to set a habit, and whatever number somebody says is wrong. Some of them are useful, but it's probably around that time. I'm going to use that little shot glass of discipline to do that. So now if I have a habit of prioritizing my future self, every other habit that I want to form starts getting easier because I have an emotional relationship with that future version of me. And how do I get the mammalian brain involved? You download that app on your phone that's like Make Me Look Old, or I think it's called Face App. And it makes you like 95 years old. You can take a selfie with it and it makes you super old. Print those out on a nice color printer and put it on your fridge. Put it next to your bed. Put it in your office where you're going to see it. So we don't really prioritize our future self because we never met them. We have no relationship to our future self. So this helps that mammalian brain start prioritizing and connecting with that longer vision, that older version of ourself.
We've talked quite a bit about self-awareness and understanding some of the things in our life that might be limiting us, whether it be like, how we show up in situations, our environment, our relationship with dopamine, etc. And you talked about you kind of called me out and said the number one mistake that, you see people make is that they think that, you said to get people to do things they don't necessarily want to do. In that same conversation, is there anything that you see right off the bat, common thread that you help people kind of stop the bleeding, where you're like, all right, generally speaking, there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that you see most people do time and time again that's destroying their focus and their inability to reach their goals?
Yes. So we'll go through I have a separate little inventory I walk each of my clients through. And I want to identify where you're feeling discomfort in your life. So it's social settings and all this other stuff. And then I'm going to identify where you seek comfort, like Instagram, TikTok, alcohol, all of these things in your life. And we're going to start making it more uncomfortable in those areas and increasing the comfort in the other areas. So much of this stuff comes down to being comfortable. So I'm seeking comfort like most people are seeking comfort in video games, TV, Netflix, binging, TikTok, or whatever. And that's more acting as an anesthetic. So I want to find out where all of these little situations, we have this long questionnaire we go through, but essentially, what are all these little scenarios where I experience some kind of discomfort? Maybe when I go to the bank, when I log in and check my account, when I have to speak on stage, when I have to do a pitch, all of these other things. And then where am I seeking comfort? And then, so this is kind of like a dopamine map, except it's stress versus anesthetic is really what we're finding out here. So I'm going to pull out of the anesthetic and start pulling some of that onto the stress side. And you'd be wildly surprised at how fast those things can kind of reverse. So where are we seeking comfort? And I can start pulling away from that. And it gives more energy, more discipline, more willpower to all of these other things and start. It is such a rapid change. I've seen people change in as little as like a week and a half, 2 weeks, just from mapping this out and getting super raw and real on a lot of this stuff. And hypnosis is a fast way to do that and a fast way to really make that change that you were asking about.
A lot of your work talks about like controlling the mind, understanding people's body language, understanding how to read people. And I think sometimes people are like, well, how does that apply to me? Like, when am I ever going to really need to quote unquote do that? Like the people I'm around, I already trust. When I go into certain situations, like no one's going to be deceitful. Like give the elevator pitch as to why people should care about that area of your work, even though they're not like in the intelligence agency.
So I think when people hear behavior profiling or body language expert, they assume that it's about lie detection. And the truth is it's more about stress detection. I really want to spot these little stress signals, and I want to spot what makes somebody really comfortable, what somebody's interested in. And everything that I teach in my company goes down to 3 things. And if you look at what determines success in life, we can look at communication skills, like can I communicate, persuade, influence very effectively? Can I master myself? So communication, self-mastery, and observation. So our failures can be traced back to I failed to communicate, I wasn't really in charge of myself, I was sending all the wrong signals, or I didn't observe the room. I failed to read the room. So this goes back to understanding what people are really feeling and understanding from a behavior profiling perspective. They use these 3 sentences. So I know one of their hidden insecurities is this. So there's hidden information in language that's not just, oh, this guy scratched his nose and he's lying, because there's so much of that shit on the internet already, which is not true. And that's one of the biggest myths. But we can also develop a little profile of everybody that we know, not as some intelligence asset, but I'm truly, as a leader, the better I am at understanding people, understanding that person's needs, the values that they're not even talking about. We can find these things hidden inside of people's language. And this is in everyday conversations. One of my books is called 6-Minute X-Ray. And within 6 minutes, you can find out a person's insecurities, their fears, their secret desires, how they make decisions, what decision type they are, and all kinds. You would be stunned at how much information you can see in like 6 minutes, just getting good at some of that stuff.
How can people apply that stuff to better themselves and to improve their life, like once they know information like that?
Well, I think it allows you to communicate with everybody a lot differently. I think it makes you a better leader because you're understanding the people that are working for you, the people that you know. But you're also, when you're going through this, inevitably, when somebody goes through this training with me, especially the 6-minute X-ray stuff, it's a huge lens into ourselves as well, because we're learning about how we use language and what our language reveals about us, these tiny little pauses and these seemingly insignificant words that people say. So we're learning not just to be a better communicator, but we're getting better at knowing ourselves. And you ask about the most common problem. I think the most common problem I've ever seen is that people don't really know who they are. They don't know themselves.
It's tough, right? Because it's like you have to be comfortable with all those parts of you, right? And I think so. Is there anything else that people can do to get good at knowing themselves other than what we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of workbooks and therapy and stuff like that, but this just getting to a point of radical honesty. So you get to a point of if I'm in a conversation and I'm feeling that there was an awkward pause, I'll just say that out loud. And if I'm feeling like nervous about something, I'll say that I'm nervous out loud. And starting to get to a point where I used to would have never revealed this little thing because I feared judgment, and start getting yourself used to making those little revelations in conversation. And I guess the end result of all of this, the most important thing that I could ever tell you about like getting to know yourself is that if once we start, like the starting point for all of this is, am I able to locate me on that childhood triangle, the friends, safety, and rewards? And this is the one thing that starts untying all of the other stuff. That is definitely from what I've seen, the fastest entry point into a lot of that self-knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, radical honesty is so important. And I think, people's ability to do that, I think, is just so transformational. Like once they get to that point, you touched on like some of the reading people and talking about how to communicate with other people and the mind control stuff. Like which one of those skills do you think is the most, like if somebody were to take a deeper dive into your work and that side of things, like which skill do you think they should focus on first?
I think going into learning how to read people automatically makes you start reading yourself and seeing it in yourself, unless you're like a psychopath and you have no self-awareness whatsoever. And I have a free class. It's like, I don't know, 6-7 hours that kind of walks you through this fundamental shift on how you view the world and how we view other people. And I think that is definitely the best place to start, because if I can learn how to see what's going on around me and learn about myself at the exact same time, that becomes a little pathway to self-mastery.
Anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't like covered as far as like what people can really do to kind of like completely like revamp their mindset to change their life, not be so lazy, be disciplined, etc.?
I would say be very careful who you're comparing yourself to. And if I'm doing that, if I'm feeling some kind of depression because I'm not getting to this thing, I'm comparing myself probably to the wrong people. And if we get to a place where we're competing with ourselves now, that's the number one way to do that. And social media is fake. And I know people say that all the time, and people consciously are kind of aware that everything's fake on social media. Your mammalian brain doesn't know that. Your mammalian brain does not know the difference between seeing something on social media and seeing something in the real world. You can't convince your mammalian brain that that's fake. Technology has grown faster than our brain has been able to adapt to it. So be very, very careful about where you spend your attention, because most people are telling you to like focus on this thing or that thing. Treat your attention like it's money.
I mean, you just touched on like the mammalian brain and how people don't know certain things. Like, what are some symptoms that somebody's got a brain that's not like acting in their best interest? Like, as we've kind of talked about how to like change things, like how can somebody know if they actually need to do so?
Well, I mean, the old quote is, if you meet an in the morning, you've been an asshole. If you meet it in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening, you're the. So any kind of self-examination of, am I getting in arguments all the time? If someone asks me about past relationships, is it always someone else's fault? That's a big one. Am I getting into disagreements with an employer or teammates or anything? Where are the patterns in my life that have happened? And do I have the level of introspection required to even open that door and look in there? Because it's just a matter of like, I'm going to stop doing this no matter what. At any cost, I'm going to stop doing this. If someone said they're going to cut your leg off tomorrow, if you don't stop doing this, you're going to stop. So it's a matter of priority. When people say, well, I don't have time for that, I have struggled with time management. No one struggles with time management. We struggle with priority management. And that's one of the biggest things.
Totally. Well, Chase, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think my audience can get a lot of value out of this conversation. People aren't following you already. Where can people get more of you?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel, Chase Hughes on YouTube. And we have another channel on YouTube where we break down behavior and deception and all that kind of stuff called the Behavior Panel.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.